Our journey begins in a moment of deep contemplation. At times, we look at the world and wonder why things are the way they are. Why do some people seem to attract prosperity while others face constant challenges? Why do some find peace amid chaos while others live in turmoil, even in quiet places? The answer to these questions may lie in a simple mirror. In a prosperous trading city, there lived a merchant whose life was devoted to the relentless pursuit of wealth. His warehouses were true treasure troves, filled with the most valuable goods from distant lands. Fine silks, rare spices, precious jewels, everything money could buy was stored there, locked away behind heavy doors and constant watch. The merchant would rise before sunrise, his mind already restless with worries about profits and losses. His servants trembled in his presence, for his mood shifted like the wind, always dissatisfied, always demanding more. To him, every coin not earned was a personal defeat. Every deal not closed was a wound to his pride. In his chambers stood a massive mirror, adorned with gold and precious stones. It was his pride, not for its beauty, but for what it represented: his social rise, his power, his wealth. Every morning, he would spend long moments before it, adjusting his fine garments, ensuring his appearance reflected his status. But what he failed to notice was that the wealthier he became, the more clouded his reflection grew. Not in a physical sense, but on a deeper level. Where others saw beauty in a child's smile, he saw only wasted time. Where others found joy in a shared meal, he saw only resources being spent. His world had become a cold place, calculated in coins and measured in profits. The townspeople avoided him, not out of fear, but out of a quiet pity. They saw in him the reflection of a trapped soul, a man who possessed everything money could buy, but had lost the ability to see life's true wealth. His eyes, once bright and curious, had become as dull as old coins. On lonely nights, sitting in his richly decorated room, something unsettled him. It was a subtle feeling, like an itch he couldn't locate. Sometimes, he found himself staring out the window, watching simple families laughing together in narrow streets, sharing a piece of bread or a story. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of something he couldn't name, perhaps a longing for a time he didn't remember living. The grand mirror on his wall began to stir unease within him. The more he gazed into it, the less he recognized himself. It was as if each day a fog thickened, not on the glass, but over his very ability to see. His servants noticed how he spent more and more time before the mirror, no longer admiring his appearance, but as if searching for something lost within his own reflection. The reality he had built around himself was just like that mirror, bright and expensive on the outside, but unable to reveal the true nature of things. Every decision driven by greed, every moment of indifference to others' suffering, every missed opportunity for compassion had added a new layer to that invisible fog. One afternoon, as he walked through his warehouses during his daily inspection, something unusual happened. A rat had gnawed through a sack of grain, spilling its contents across the floor. As his servants hurried to clean the mess, fearing his reaction, the merchant stood frozen, staring at the grains. It was as if, for the first time, he saw beyond material loss. Those grains could feed families, yet they sat there, hoarded, waiting for the perfect moment to be sold for the highest price. In that moment, standing among his riches, the merchant felt the weight of his own clouded reflection. The reality he saw every day, a reality of scarcity, distrust, and loneliness, was merely a mirror of his own thoughts and actions. That was when his feet carried him, almost involuntarily, toward the temple on the hill, where an old monk swept leaves with a serene smile. The sun was beginning to set when the merchant arrived at the temple steps. The monk continued his rhythmic work, sweeping the fallen leaves with smooth and precise movements. For a moment, the merchant simply stood there, watching. It was strange to see someone perform such a simple task with so much attention and care. Golden leaves danced in the wind, falling once again onto the freshly swept ground. Yet this didn't seem to bother the monk. He simply continued his work, as if each new leaf was an opportunity to begin again. His face radiated a peace the merchant had never seen before, a peace that seemed to come from within, unaffected by external circumstances. Intrigued, the merchant noticed the monk's simple robes, patched in several places yet impeccably clean. His bare feet touched the ground with reverence, and his calloused hands held the broom as if it were a sacred object. How could someone seem so fulfilled while having so little? Sensing the visitor's presence, the monk looked up. His gaze was direct and kind, free of the fear or flattery the merchant was so used to seeing in others' eyes. It was a look that seemed to pierce through all layers of wealth and status, reaching directly to the core of being. "Welcome," the monk said, his voice as calm as flowing water. "I see the leaves have brought you here today as well." The merchant frowned, confused. He hadn't come because of the leaves, or had he? Why exactly had his feet led him here? The monk's words, though simple, carried a weight he couldn't explain. "How can you be content with this life?" the merchant asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Living in this empty temple, performing meaningless tasks day after day?" The monk smiled and rested his broom against a temple pillar. He walked toward a small side garden where a pond reflected the evening sky. With a gentle gesture, he invited the merchant to follow him. "Look at this pond," the monk said. "When its waters are disturbed, what can you see?" The merchant looked at the water's surface, where a soft breeze created small ripples. The sky's reflection was distorted, fragmented into thousands of flickering pieces. "Nothing clearly," he replied, still unsure of where the monk was going with this. "And when the water is still?" Slowly, the wind calmed and the surface of the pond became smooth again. The sky's reflection, once fragmented, formed into perfect clarity. The golden clouds of the setting sun, birds flying back to their nests, even the first stars beginning to appear. Everything was there, mirrored with stunning sharpness. "The nature of the reflection," the monk continued, "does not depend on the sky, but on the water. In the same way, the reality we experience does not depend on the outer world, but on the quality of our mind." The merchant felt something stir within him. It was as if those words had struck a long-forgotten chord in his heart. He thought of the mirror in his chambers, how his reflection seemed increasingly distant and unrecognizable. "But how?" he asked, his voice now softer, almost a whisper. "How can one keep the mind calm in such a restless world?" The monk bent down and picked up a small stone. "Watch," he said, raising his hand above the pond. The merchant instinctively leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the mirror-like surface of the water. The monk let the stone drop. It broke the lake's surface with a soft plop, creating concentric ripples that spread out to the edges. The perfect reflection of the sky shattered completely. "Our mind is like this lake," the monk explained. "Every thought of greed, every moment of anger, every unchecked desire is like a stone falling into its waters. The ripples that form are the consequences, disturbing not only our peace, but also affecting everyone around us." The merchant watched, mesmerized, as the ripples slowly faded. He remembered how many stones he had thrown into his own inner lake over the years. Every dishonest deal, every cruel word, every moment of indifference to others' suffering, they were all stones that had clouded the waters of his mind. "But look," the monk continued, "even after the disturbance, the water naturally returns to its calm state. This is the original nature of our mind, clear, still, capable of reflecting reality as it truly is." The sun had completely set now, and the first stars began to dot the night sky. The lake, now perfectly still, reflected them with extraordinary clarity. It was as if there were two skies, one above and one below. "How can I," the merchant began, his voice trembling slightly, "how can I clear the mirror of my mind?" The monk smiled gently and walked over to a small bell hanging from a nearby branch. With a soft motion, he rang it. The crystal-clear sound echoed through the garden, creating a profound silence. "First," the monk said, "we must learn to hear the silence between sounds, to see the space between thoughts. Sit with me." The merchant, still dressed in his fine clothes, hesitated for a moment before sitting on the dirt ground beside the monk. It was the first time in years he allowed himself such simplicity. "Close your eyes," the monk instructed. "Breathe as the lake breathes gently, naturally. Watch your thoughts as you would watch clouds in the sky, without trying to change them, without trying to hold on to them." Minutes passed in silence. For the first time, the merchant noticed the constant storm of thoughts within his mind. Worries about money, plans for new ventures, fears of losing what he had gained. It was an endless storm. "Do not fight your thoughts." The monk's voice was as soft as a breeze. "Simply observe. Just as the lake does not struggle against the reflection of passing clouds, our mind need not struggle against thoughts. Let them come, let them go." Gradually, like the lake after the stone had fallen, the merchant's mind began to settle. Between one thought and the next, he started to notice brief moments of clarity, fleeting instances of pure inner silence. "Each moment of awareness," the monk continued, "is like cleaning a small part of the mirror. We cannot force the mind to be still, just as we cannot force the lake to be calm. But we can create the conditions for its natural clarity to appear." The merchant felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was as if something deeply buried within him was finally finding space to breathe. Sitting there on the earth, his expensive clothes covered in dust, he felt richer than he ever had in his luxurious chambers. "But what about my life?" he asked, opening his eyes. "My business, my responsibilities?" The monk picked up a fallen leaf and gently placed it on the surface of the lake. It floated, perfectly balanced. "See how the leaf rests on the water," he said. "It is in the world, yet it does not disturb the lake's clarity. In the same way, we can live in the world, manage our business, fulfill our responsibilities, all while keeping our mind as clear as this lake." At that moment, a night bird cut through the air above them, its reflection gliding silently across the lake's surface. The merchant watched in awe as the water remained calm, even with the movement mirrored upon it. The bird's reflection vanished into the darkness, but something new had awakened in the merchant's consciousness. It was as if he were seeing the world through a different lens, clearer and deeper at the same time. "Tomorrow," the merchant said, his voice now carrying a new sense of determination, "I need to take inventory of my warehouses. How can I maintain this clarity when I'm surrounded by all those goods, all those worries?" The monk rose silently and walked to a small nearby hut. He returned with a lit lantern and an old, simple mirror without any decoration. He placed the mirror in the merchant's hands and held the lantern so the light illuminated the reflection. "Look at your face in this mirror," the monk instructed. "What do you see?" The merchant gazed at his reflection in the flickering lantern light. He saw the lines of worry on his forehead, the tension around his eyes, the hardness that years of tough negotiations had carved into his expression. But he also saw something more, a softness beginning to emerge, like the first ray of sunlight after a long night. "Now," the monk continued, moving the lantern to different angles, "observe how the light changes the reflection. The face is the same, but its appearance shifts with the change of light." As the shadows danced across the mirror, the merchant began to understand. "Our perception," he started. "Yes," the monk finished. "The reality we experience is like this reflection. It's not the objects or situations that must change, but the light by which we view them, the awareness with which we observe them." The monk then took a piece of cloth and covered half of the mirror. "Your warehouses, your goods, your business, They are like this partially covered mirror. You were seeing only part of reality, the part illuminated by the light of greed and fear. With a gentle motion, he removed the cloth. But when we lift the veils we've placed ourselves, reality reveals itself in full. Those same warehouses can be seen not just as sources of personal wealth, but as means to benefit many. A merchant looked at his reflection again, this time with deeper understanding. He recalled the sacks of grain in his warehouses, the fine silks, the spices. Each item began to take on a new meaning in his mind. The grain, he murmured, could feed families. The silks could warm those who were cold. The spices could bring comfort to the sick. The monk nodded silently. Reality hasn't changed, he said, but your way of seeing it has. And when our vision changes, our actions naturally follow. A night breeze stirred, making the lantern's flame dance. The shadows on the merchant's face shifted once more, but now he could see beyond them. Each variation of light revealed a different facet of himself, like the facets of a jewel slowly being uncovered. But, the merchant asked, what if I lose this clarity? What if tomorrow, when I return to my business, my old way of seeing things comes back? The monk placed the lantern on the ground and pointed to the stars reflected in the lake. Clouds may cover the stars temporarily, but they are still there. In the same way, your true nature clear, compassionate, wise remains, even when it's briefly obscured by thoughts of greed or fear. The merchant felt a profound truth in those words. It was as if each star reflected in the lake was a seed of potential, waiting to bloom in his future actions. His hands, which once only knew how to count coins and bargain for prices, now seemed capable of much more. The night had deepened, and the garden's silence was broken only by the soft chirping of crickets. The merchant realized he had been sitting there for hours, yet time seemed to have taken on a different quality. Every moment felt filled with a meaning he had never noticed before. Holding the mirror in his hands, he looked at his reflection one last time before returning it to the monk. The man staring back at him was no longer a stranger. It was as if he had reunited with an old friend, long forgotten. Returning the mirror to the monk, the merchant felt something different in his hands, a lightness that did not come from the absence of the object, but from a deeper transformation within himself. The weight of years of accumulation began to dissipate like mist under the morning sun. "Come," said the monk, rising with the lantern. "I want to show you something." They walked to a more secluded part of the temple garden, where a small lotus pond slept beneath the moonlight. The flowers were closed for the night, but their shapes were visible in the soft glow of the lantern. "Look at these flowers," the monk said, lowering the lantern to illuminate the dark water where the lotuses grew. "They are born in the muddy depths but emerge immaculate. Their roots are in the mud, yet their petals are never stained." The merchant leaned in, fascinated by the living metaphor before his eyes. "How is that possible?" he asked, more to himself than to the monk. "This is the nature of the lotus flower," the monk replied, "just as it is the nature of our true mind. We can live in the world of business, of transactions, of money, yet our essence remains untouched like the lotus blooming above the mud." A frog leaped among the flowers, sending ripples across the dark water. The merchant watched as the waves spread and then slowly disappeared, leaving the surface calm once again. "See," the monk continued, "even when disturbed, the water returns to its tranquil nature. Our mind is the same. Every disturbance is temporary. Every agitation passes. Clarity is our natural state." The merchant thought of his warehouses, his wealth, and the entire world he had built around himself. For the first time, he realized he could exist in that world without being consumed by it, like the lotus in the mud. "Tomorrow," he began, "when I return to my business." "Tomorrow," the monk gently interrupted, "will be just another moment to practice this truth. Every negotiation can be an opportunity to express compassion, Every transaction can be an act of mutual benefit. A night breeze stirred the lotus leaves, casting dancing shadows on the water. The merchant observed how, even in darkness, the flowers maintained their dignity, their intrinsic purity. For years, the merchant confessed, I believed I needed to protect my wealth from the world, that every coin not earned was a loss. Now I see I was guarding something that needed no protection and neglecting something that truly needed to be preserved. The monk smiled, his expression soft in the lantern's glow. And what was it that needed to be preserved? Clarity, the merchant replied, the words rising from a place of deep understanding. The ability to see things as they truly are, not as my fear or greed painted them. The wind carried the gentle fragrance of night-blooming flowers, mingling with the scent of damp earth. It was a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things, the purity and the mud, wealth and simplicity, the material and the spiritual. Every moment, said the monk, is a new opportunity for that clarity to emerge. Like these lotuses that open each morning, our true nature is always ready to bloom. The merchant looked at his own hands, calloused from years of counting coins. Now he saw that these same hands could count blessings, distribute aid, and build bridges between abundance and need. The night had deepened, and the silence felt almost tangible. The stars above and their reflections in the garden pond created a sense of infinity in every direction. The merchant realized he stood in the midst of that infinity, not as a hoarder of wealth, but as a channel through which abundance could flow. The clearest mirror, the monk said, his voice blending with the night, is not the one adorned with gold and jewels, but the one cleansed of all distortions of our own making. The monk and the merchant remained silent for a long moment, the words about the crystalline mirrors still echoing in the night air. Then the monk did something unexpected. He began to laugh. It was a soft, gentle laugh, yet it carried a deep joy. What's so funny? The merchant asked, intrigued. Here we are, the monk replied, still smiling, talking about mirrors, reflections, and reality, when the deepest truth is that there is no mirror at all. The merchant frowned, confused. What do you mean there's no mirror? What we see is not a reflection of reality. It is reality itself manifesting through our consciousness. When we think we're seeing a reflection, we create a separation that was never there. The monk picked up the lantern and began walking back to the main temple, gesturing for the merchant to follow. As they entered, the lantern's light revealed the plain walls, the worn wooden floor, and a small altar with a single flower. Look at this temple, the monk said. When you first arrived, what did you see? I saw poverty, the merchant answered honestly. I saw simplicity that felt empty to me. And now? The merchant looked around again. The same walls, the same floor, the same simple altar, but something had profoundly changed. Now I see peace. I see purpose in every empty space, beauty in simplicity, wealth in minimalism. And what changed? The monk asked. I changed, the merchant replied, his understanding deepening as he spoke. Or rather, the way I see has changed. Exactly, the monk smiled. There is no mirror between you and reality, no separation between the observer and the observed. When your consciousness transforms, reality transforms, not because it changed, but because you are finally seeing it as it truly is. The first ray of morning sunlight streamed through a high window in the temple, bathing the space in golden light. The merchant realized he had spent the entire night there, yet felt more awake than ever. What should I do now? He asked. Live, the monk replied simply. Live with this new understanding. Your warehouses, your goods, your business, they are not obstacles to your clarity, but opportunities to express it. Every transaction can be an act of compassion, every deal a chance to benefit others. The merchant looked at his hands again, now bathed in the light of dawn. So, I don't need to give anything up? Give up only illusions. The monk smiled. Let go of the idea that there's a you separate from the reality you observe. Let go of the belief that happiness lies in what you accumulate. Let go of the fear that makes you see enemies where you could see friends. The sun had fully risen now, filling the temple with light. The merchant bowed deeply to the monk and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "Remember," the monk replied, "reality was never a mirror that needed polishing. It was only our perception that needed to be clarified. When we see clearly, we realize the world has always been perfect, including its imperfections." The message of this story is profound and universal. The reality we experience is not something separate from us, like a reflection in a mirror, but a direct expression of our consciousness. When we transform how we see, reality naturally transforms. We don't need to change the external world to find peace and purpose. We only need to clarify our perception, removing the distortions created by our fear, greed, and illusion of separation. Our true nature, like the lotus flower, remains pure even amid the most challenging circumstances. True wealth does not lie in what we accumulate, but in the clarity with which we perceive and the compassion with which we act. When we deeply understand this, every moment becomes an opportunity to manifest this truth. And every situation, whether in business, relationships, or daily life, becomes a path to awakening.